If you had a precon and the first card you used to upgrade it was Rhystic Study, you are actively making your deck worse. Rhystic Study is a fantastic card, it's stable in the format and maybe even the best card draw spell we have, but why does it make a precon worse? Staples, high-powered cards, they have a catch whenever you add them to your deck. They add a huge target on your back. You could be down on land drops, have nothing else on board, but as soon as you play a Rhystic Study, you become a threat based on that card's reputation alone. The problem with precons using extremely powerful cards as the first step of upgrading is that they are not capable of handling the threat level that card gives you. Precons are usually designed to compete against other precons in a way that is a seesaw of power. Maybe on turn 4, Timmy becomes a threat, so Johnny then removes his commander to slow him down. Then on turn 5, Spike takes the opening in the board state to throw out a combo piece, gearing up to take one player out next turn. The game usually goes back and forth in a state to where one player takes the advantage, a second player deals with that advantage, and a third one takes the advantage from the opening. Now, what happens on turn 4 if Timmy was to play Rhystic Study? Most precons don't have reliable enchantment removal, so Rhystic Study has the threat of staying out on the board for most of, if not all of the game. And if players can't remove a permanent, then they get rid of you. The threat level of the card Rhystic Study poses is much greater than any precon can handle. Even if the Rhystic Study is removed after a turn, the card advantage that player who cast it has looks vast. Even if you didn't draw anything good with it, the other players are seeing that they have 4 to 5 cards in hand versus your 10 or up cards, making you the archenemy and everyone coming right at you. Now, do I think that decks should just not include power cards like Rhystic Study? No, of course not, but I tend to think of these cards in a different way than just normal upgrades. Powerful permanents like these, I like to call my finishers, and not in the same way that finishers as win cons, but in a sense that they are one of the last pieces I will add to a deck. Rhystic Study suits a deck more that's around an 8 or a 9 that you've already put some time into optimizing versus just jamming it into a precon that sits around 6 or a 7. This is because the decks that are looking to add these powerful cards are probably already powerful enough to where even without drawing Rhystic Study, they will have a good threat level by the middle turns. This means that adding Rhystic Study doesn't add the same level of threat as a precon, since the deck is already expecting a decent amount of action coming at them. These decks are optimized to handle these threats and removal, and are not relying on one stable card to power them ahead of the other players. So now that I've covered why I think that finisher cards should be added last, what do I think should be added first to a deck? Well, whenever I personally upgrade decks, I have 3 different steps that I follow. First is the mana base, second is the game plan, and then third is rounding out the deck. Starting with step 1, I believe that the mana base is the most important thing to upgrade your deck first, but it is almost always overlooked by players that are looking to power up their decks. Well, why is this? I'm guessing that if you're watching this video, that you're interested in making your decks more powerful, and when you add different creatures and enchantments, usually you're thinking of the most optimal scenario when adding them. I'm adding a Craterhoof Behemoth for when I have 10 creatures on my board and I can overrun the table. I'm adding Rise of the Dark Realms to grab every creature that I've been forcing into everyone's graveyard and win the game from there. Now, what these spells all have in common, though, is relying on your deck to be functioning before you play them. These are payoff cards, and your deck has to work before you play them. What you want for your deck when adding these cards is consistency when playing them, and optimizing your mana base is the most effective way to do that. Before you get into adding those powerful cards that you want to make your deck juiced up, I would say to make sure that your deck doesn't fall into this often easy trap. Let's say you're playing an Esper deck and you want to cast Bolas Citadel, but it's turn 7 and you're not able to tap for 3 black pips. Now you're screwed. You have the powerful card, but your deck isn't functioning. Or let's say you have the most optimal hand for your position, but your deck's tempo and curve is thrown off by having too many tap lands, and by the time you're wanting to play these powerful cards, the board state of everyone else has moved to the point where those cards you were wanting to play 1 or 2 turns ago are now kind of useless. The best way to make sure that your deck will be fun to play game in and game out is to make sure that your mana base works every single time you play it. Looking at a 3-color deck, you probably have at least 15 lands that tap for multiple colors outside of your ramp. Now let's say that you start upgrading. You're going to take 3 of your tap lands for 3 pain lands, and then you're going to take out 3 of your scry lands for 3 slow lands. Now, let's take a look at the price of how much these upgrades would cost for these 6 cards. As you can see, the price is still vastly under what Rhystic Study would be. You could buy these 6 cards for almost $20 under what Rhystic Study's going for. And that's even with Shattered Sanctum going for double any of the other lands due to the enemy soul lands not being reprinted in a while. This also means that you could still add plenty of low-priced utility lands, or maybe one or two more expensive ones, that are still around the same price as Rhystic Study in total. So, not only will you be adding more useful cards to your deck this way, but you're also making your deck's tempo and consistency increase greatly over adding in just one finisher card like Rhystic Study. Now, the need to upgrade your mana base scales by how many colors your deck is. A monocolor or two-color deck will probably be able to have only 4 or 5 major upgrades in their mana base and be able to consistently go, while a 4 or 5 color deck obviously is going to need their entire mana base optimized just to have the most consistency as possible. What I would have anyone watching take away from this point is that your mana base is the heart of your deck. The more muscles you add to it, the more you need your heart to pump. Now, when I've upgraded my mana base first before, I've noticed that in playtesting and games, the cards that I would previously cut are much better than I thought with a worse mana base, as in casting my Masters of Ceremonies in my Goad deck on step 3 rather than on turns 4 or 5 greatly increases my chance of politicking with the table enough for them to not attack me, and I can spend more time setting up my game plan, as they all have to go at each other without me even casting my Goad spells. And this all is happening with a card that I was thinking about cutting before I optimized my mana base and saw how good this card could be if I'm able to play it 1 or 2 turns earlier. The mana base of your deck is the most important thing when it comes to consistency and being able to keep your deck's tempo, which is why I strongly believe that it's the first thing that should be optimized when you go to upgrade your decks. Now, moving into step 2 of my optimized guide, this is a lot more unique for each deck rather than the mana base, just due to how many options you have for each game plan. All I can say is that your main goal in step 2 of my upgrade guide should be to make sure that your deck does the thing that you want to do most. Now, whether it's mill, sacrifice, tokens, you want to make sure that now that you know that your mana base is optimized, that your game plan is too. Now, once you are satisfied with how your deck is functioning after this step, it is probably around an 8 on the power scale. So if your pod doesn't play high-powered decks, I would probably stop here or talk to them before adding anything else from the final step. Now, if you're okay with bringing your deck over the power level of 8, this is where my final step of rounding out comes in. This is where, after countless games and playtests, you get into the nitty-gritty of your deck. You add in the specific pieces of ramp that you need to push your deck ahead, you add in the creatures and spells that function perfectly with the rest of your deck, and finally, you add in the deck finishers. I like adding deck finishers in last because of 2 reasons. You are not relying on them to have fun, and 2, your deck is capable of the heat that they will bring if you're lucky enough to play them on curve. Adding a Rhystic Study to the Esper deck that I've been optimizing throughout the video has a mana base and consistent game plan. This means that Rhystic Study is going to feel and fit in much better than just jamming it into a precon. Not only does the card fit the power level better, but it's also probably going to be more fun to play in that deck over the other. There aren't a lot of people who can manage to have multiple cards like Rhystic Study in their collection, so making sure you put them in the right deck is important when it comes to making sure you're having the most fun while playing. Now, I hope that you all found this video helpful, and if you have any questions or points that you would like to bring up, I would love to hear and answer them in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video today, I'd love it if you liked and subscribed, but until next time, have a good one.